Good morning. I know that you have lots to say to each other. How are you? Welcome. It's so good to see you. Okay. I am delighted that you are all here. This is going to be a fabulous hour. And I just want to kind of give you the lay of the land. We've got 4 terrific panelists who are going to tell us interesting things about their brilliant career, but their career framed in their brilliant lives. And I chose them for some very special reasons. One, I know all of them. I really just got to know Anne. And they have done really extraordinary things, but not necessarily by the definition of what's extraordinary when I walked in the door in HBS in the late 70s, where there seemed to be sort of a single view of what is success, how do you get it, and how soon do you get it, and how much is it actually worth in dollars. These women have created careers that fit with their personal goals and their personal life. What do you know? Those things are dynamic and they've changed over time. 2 of the women have worked pretty much with one institution for their full work life, but they have changed who they are, what the contract is, what's the deal, what's the work. 2 of the women have worked in many, many different settings, even completely different kinds of environments, and they're going to talk about how they restructure their work life. All of them have personal lives that are as satisfying and wonderful as their work lives, and I don't know how they do it, but they're going to tell us. So I'm going to start with Paige. Now, I said the format, we each will speak for 5 minutes, no more, and I'm sitting up here to give you the T sign. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time with you asking the questions that you desperately want to have answered. So we'll start with Paige.
Hi, so I'm Paige Arnof-Fenn. I'm the founder and CEO of a strategic marketing consulting firm called Mavens and Moguls, which I started 12 years ago. And I'm based about a mile from campus. I live in Cambridge. I look at my career in basically kind of 3 chapters, if you will. Before business school, I was a financial analyst at Morgan Stanley. My father and both grandfathers were Southern bank presidents. My grandfathers lived in Arkansas and Tennessee, and both were presidents of banks. And my dad ran the biggest bank in Louisiana when I was growing up, and he was in the class of '63 with the 8 women here. And if you had met me when I was about 2 years old, I would be wearing my Harvard sweatshirt, and you would, my friends and my parents would pat me on the head and say, do you want to be a teacher or nurse when you grow up? And I'd put my hands on my hips and shake my head and say, nope, I'm going to Harvard Business School and I'm going to be a bank president. So, from very young. And so I came back to HBS and rebranded myself. I realized my first week on Wall Street, I really wasn't cut out to do banking. I was good at it, but I really didn't like it very much. I loved my marketing class first year. I got a 1 in marketing. I was asked to be a marketing tutor. I was president of the marketing club my second year. I got a summer internship at P&G, and I went back to P&G in brand management right after HBS and stayed there for 3 years. I loved marketing. And so the first chapter of my career I describe as kind of my corporate America marketing chapter. I left P&G, ran a joint venture for the Olympics, another big brand, and then I was hired by Coca-Cola to be the assistant chief marketing officer there in my early 30s. Huge marketing job, big platform, most recognized brand in the world. I then got bitten by the dot-com bug in the 90s, and I became chief marketing officer of an internet startup out in Los Angeles. And we went public in '99, and we were sold to Yahoo, and then my husband and I moved to the East Coast. I was chief marketing officer of a second startup that was sold to Bertelsmann. Then I was chief marketing officer of a third startup that I got bought out of. So that was my kind of CMO startup phase. And I had 3, I call them my base hits. I'm not a Google bajillionaire, but I made a little money 3 times, which was great. And then the current chapter is my more entrepreneurial chapter, where I started this marketing firm about 12 years ago. Myra did 2 cases on our firm, an A and B. My dad thought that was the coolest thing ever. Like, having gone to the school, he just there's nothing that I could have done to achieve more success than to be the protagonist in an HBS case, honestly. But I've loved running my own business. I married 21 years ago to a guy that is awesome, and we're a 2-entrepreneur, no pet, no plant, no kid by choice family, which I love. People say, God, you've built this amazing company. I have built a company, but I look at it more as a brand. I'm a marketing person, and I would say that I built a platform to do things that I enjoy doing. I serve on boards, I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of speaking. I wrote a monthly column for Entrepreneur for 4 years. I've written a column for Forbes for 2 years. I'm 47 years old. Both my grandfathers worked until they died. I don't think retiring is really in my DNA. I love working. And I like the fact that I've built a company to do what I like to do, to get paid to do something that I feel like I'm pretty good at and people value. So we can talk later about the dual career couple thing. We can talk about, we commuted for a while. I can talk about a whole bunch of things, but basically love my life, love my career. The big surprise to me is when I was in business school, I'm class of 91, got here in 89. My goal was to be like Meg Whitman or Carly Fiorina. I wanted to be a Fortune 500 CEO. That was absolutely my definition of success. And my definition just changed over time. I didn't plan on it changing, but I love running a successful small business and having the autonomy and flexibility to do what I like doing and not have quarterly earnings and a board of directors or VCs telling me how to spend my time. So that's me.
Thanks, Paige. I'm going to skip to Anne because Anne has been at one employer for most of her life, and she's going to tell her story.
So I joined Bain and Company in 1989, right after I graduated from Princeton University. And if you fast forward to today, I'm still actually at Bain. So 24 years later, I'm at the first employer that I had ever worked with. But there were some career decisions that I made along the way that I wouldn't have expected when I look back at that 21-year-old who walked into the doors of Copley Place. So I'll share them with you. I think the first maybe decade or 15 years or so are actually quite consistent in what I would have thought about having made it at Bain. I worked in Boston for a couple years. I went to HBS. As did most people in my class. I graduated the class of 1994. I met my husband there. He and I went out to Asia, so we've been in Hong Kong since 1994. He had a job at a private equity firm. I had my job at Bain, and all we did is work. Work was the first priority for both of us. And it was super exciting to be in Asia back then. The deals were bigger, it was all about growth strategy and so on. And it was very exciting. It was a good place to be if we wanted to optimize and maximize our careers. And when I think about the challenges back then, one was managing dual careers. There were definitely choices that both of us ended up having to make, which weren't as optimal as making choices for one person. And the second thing was family. What I said yesterday resonates very much with me. If I had thought about the kind of mother that I would be, I wouldn't have thought I'd only have one child at the end of my kind of life, and also that I would have had the child at the age of 35. And so that's what happens when you put your career first. It was incredibly fulfilling. I ended up being a partner in 2000, and at that time there were only 20 women, female partners at Bain. So it was a wonderful time to be part of that community or that tribe. But then I kept on working and doing great things in my career. But at 2007, after about 7 years of being a partner, you're up for director. And I was told, oh, you're not going to make it this year. And I can say that easily now, but at that time I would have had to gulp and get my tissues out and wipe tears away. It was devastating for somebody who had put career first so front and foremost. And I didn't know what to do. It really was the first time I needed to rethink what would happen if your plan didn't go according to what you thought would be a perfect plan. I took time off. I thought about what I wanted to do. And again, you can hear from my narrative that I'm quite risk averse. And so very risk averse. So at at the end of the day, I decided to stay with Bain. And, part of me would have loved, like, oh, I'm going to quit and, screw you. But, that wasn't me. Carrie's laughing. That definitely is not me. So I said, what do I want to do that would be super exciting and passionate to me, but still allow me the safety net within Bain? And that was the first time I was really honest about, I actually didn't like doing the global cases and so on. I didn't like being on the 11 o'clock, p.m. calls. I liked to have a little bit more control my own business, so to speak. And so for the past 5 years, I've run a kind of non-profit practice. I have the luxury of doing a couple projects every year, which are given out for free. We do it for pro bono. And I can pick and choose who we want to work with. And it can be anybody as small as the local Pregnant Girls Crisis Center in Hong Kong, where we can have a huge impact, to somebody like Bill and Melissa Gates Foundation, where we're helping with philanthropy. And it's a much bigger issue, but it's much more kind of corporate, if you will. And I love my job. I work a couple days a week. I take the summers off and spend that with my husband and my child traveling. And I feel like I have my own kind of, when I hear Paige talk about being an entrepreneur, I feel like I was able to create that at Bain. The downside is I've become very irrelevant to most people at Bain. And that's by choice, but it also is kind of painful at the end of the day when your cohort continues to move on and so on, and you're doing your own thing. And you have to remind yourself it is by choice, but you get the mixed emotion with that.
And thank you. I know there are lots of questions. We're going to go to Cheryl. Cheryl has certainly had a career in so many different industries, continents, and so on. So I'll let you tell the story.
Well, I'm just going to give you sort of a description of some of the unusual things that I've done. I think that the last time I had structure in my life was when I was at college, and I was a pre-med because my Chinese-American family, probably like yours, Anne, was very bent on having doctors in the family. I threw that out the window, so let's start with HBS. Probably by any traditional measure of HBS, I am not a success. 5 years out, when the average HBS grad was earning $400,000 a year, I was interviewing peasants in rural China. I was trying to make dalliances with, to interview dissidents in China without the security goons finding me. I was actually tailed by security agents, state security agents in China, and trying to lose those tails. Actually, I was reading Robert Ludlum novels for spy tips, literally. I am guilty of, we had a safe in the apartment, and I literally took a hair and put it across the edge. And then when we came back from vacation, we wanted to make sure that it was still there. So I learned all those tips. 10 years out, I was in Japan as a foreign correspondent covering the banking crisis, but also covering hijackings, interviewing the latest cell phone. Japan was very early with cell phones, and also chasing down victims of a gas attack in the subway by a religious cult in Japan. 15 years out, I was at the New York Times in New York, running the circulation department for the under 30 crowd. And that was, I was really excited about that, but when I did a survey of 2,000 college students, and I asked them, what is the first word that comes to your mind when you think of the New York Times? And the top 3 words, big, boring, newspaper. My low point was when I was talking to a college professor, and he said, he's the kind of college professor we love because he assigned the New York Times in the classroom all the time, and the kids would actually go to the web because they couldn't afford a subscription. They'd go to the web and they'd print it out and they'd bring it into class. And so he's saying that one time he was early in the classroom and he heard 2 guys chatting, and one guy said, I saw something really amazing, and this was at Long Island University, which is on Long Island, like maybe less than an hour, 45 minutes out of New York City. And he said, I saw something amazing at the deli the other day. And the other kid says, what did you see? He said, I saw pre-printed versions of the New York Times. So I saw the writing on the wall for the newspaper industry. Then I guess, what is it? I'm losing track of 20 years out. Okay, 20 years out, I was on the startup team for New York Times Television, New York Times TV. In fact, I was the first anchor. But of course, you don't hear about New York Times Television because it shut down after 3 years. 25 years out, my husband and I wrote a book, Half the Sky, and it's about women and girls, the challenges facing women and girls in the developing world. And we learned a hell of a lot in writing it, but we also knew that we wanted to reach people beyond the choir. So we did a documentary on it that aired on PBS, and we also did maybe some of you don't know this, we also did a Facebook game. So there is a game that you can play on Facebook, Half the Sky. So that's sort of, some snippets of what I've done. And along the way, though, it may not, may not be successful in the traditional HBS terms, but I have learned a lot along the way about meaning, balance, happiness, and how to make a difference. And I know that there are no accountants up there, but what does matter really is probably how many people you help and how you help people. And so I hope I'm making it count. And so that's my life journey.
And by the way, you do have a family, including a son at Harvard.
Right, that's right.
And we'll talk a little bit about how they fit that in with the travels around the world and the incredible number of interviews that you and your husband did together. Yes. So that's an interesting another piece. Now, before you talked to Angela, if you went to HBS within the last 20 years, you were in some way, somehow, very influenced by Angela. And she is really the power behind the throne, if that might be. She is the COO of HBS. Incredible, but the way that she's done things and the way that she's managed is, to me, an inspiration. So much so that when I brought my daughter here, who's a 2000 MBA, I wanted to meet Angela. I said, this is your inspiration.
Oh,
so.
Thank you, thank you. And it's rather surreal to be in this room because Section D, room 209, where you are, Laurel, right? So spent my entire, first year sitting, and so here we are in that gig, and I sit and think, all right, so I haven't moved much more than a half a mile, right, in circumference, but it has been an extraordinary run of being here. So I will often get this kind of like bewildered look from people of, so you stayed there? Why did you go there? But then actually it becomes, as you start peeling it back, and I'll peel it back for you a bit so that you can actually understand a little bit more about why this choice and what actually do I do. It kind of goes back to a beginning point of, I think you all will have the same probably reaction. There are life experiences that you have that it's only when you look backwards you realize they add up to something. And what I do realize when I look backwards is how much, at a very formative point in my life, how much education mattered to my parents. The sacrifices they made to make sure that I had the best education I could have, the kinds of things that they were doing with their own schooling, even if that was going at night. My experiences when I went to undergrad and then to graduate school, so there's these impressions that become left on you of, all right, this is a field of education, social enterprise, higher education that I find quite intriguing. So I come here with the notion, I had been in manufacturing before coming here, and again with this piece of running things. I come to the business school, and before coming, I keep these actually in my office. They'll resonate with you. What they don't teach you at Harvard Business School, what they really teach you at Harvard Business School, and then the one that really, was very important for me to read is Toughing It Out at HBS, The Making of a Woman MBA. So I read these things before coming into here and thought, okay, so this, I really want to run something. I think education is what I would like to do. And as the way it actually evolved is that I ended up getting an offer from admissions. And so my starting point here in this whole piece is really what I think of as ground zero. It becomes a piece of how do you tell the story of a school? How do you find talent? How do you spot talent? How do you actually make offers? And so it actually is, that's where the beginning point is. But what I also realized, and I'm sure you have a similar experience, is when you're here in the classroom, you're actually only seeing this institution through one lens. You're only seeing it through the MBA side. But what I could see is, okay, there's something more that meets the eye here. The way that the classroom happens, what the faculty are doing and how they teach, the fact that 400 cases are coming at you all pulled together all the time. There is a other side to all that. There is another side to the kinds of events that happen here. So I realized there's a whole lot more to this enterprise where the running of it is very intriguing. So there starts in admissions and it evolves through a whole series of things, student services, housing, but all of these kind of foundational points of how does this run? And if you think about a university, truly, it's a city. We have hotel operations, we have security, we have investments, we have fundraising and philanthropy that's done. We have an extraordinary staff of 1,300 people. We're an enterprise that's $600 million in an operating budget. So when you actually start, we have unions. We have 6 unions, in fact. And so you start to say, oh, okay, yeah, you're working with ad agency, PR firms. This is a little bit of everything. So that's what compelled me to come into it in the first place, is that desire to be part of an educational setting, and also to be able to, what could I do to affect higher education more broadly? And that I have just really enjoyed, being able to work with Harvard Medical School, School of Public Health, local institute, MIT, so again, in the region of higher education, more broadly, other business schools, Stanford Business School, Wharton, and that becomes an arena to how do you affect change in higher education, given the fact that we've all gone through it, our kids are going through it. So in the middle of all that, I had the great privilege of building Spangler, MacArthur Hall, Hawes Hall. Never in my wildest dreams would I have been part of designing and building, redoing all of this. The iLab, Harvard Goes Global. We were here. We start then with California. The next thing you know, we actually have turned ourselves into a multinational. And it really is, being involved in how do you take Harvard Business School and help it to become a multinational enterprise with all the sets of things that the details behind making that so. So that's a bit of my story about from when I was in Laurel's seat and how it's evolved over time. And the other part to it is certainly there is my other part of my life is married for nearly 25 years. So I guess I have a little bit of Ann Moore in me. Same institution, fabulous husband. Best decision you can make is who your life partner is. And we have 2 fabulous children, 19 and 16 years old. So trying to do all the things we do, making sure that that's what matters, right? Is any success that I have in life will only be measured by what happens with my children. I know that. And so how do you do what you need to do, trying to manage that? So that's a bit of my story.
And we will hear a little bit more about some of the creative bargaining that you had to do with HBS to be able to put this together. Long before we had any parental leave policy at the school, which we were pretty late to the table, but we were kind of leading edge at Harvard in some of that. We've got a little preview, and you all have books with their bios, so now I'm going to open it up, and you're going to have a half an hour to have a dialogue. And if you have a question directed to a specific person, that's fine. If it's more general, I'll kind of field it and try to move it around a little bit. Yes, Trish?
Cheryl, I think I speak for everyone in the room in saying that you're spectacularly successful, and that you could feel not so is my question, because I feel this way. I don't speak for everyone, but everyone I talk to, and I'm 25 years out, feels not successful. Why do we all feel that somehow we are not measured up? Why is that?
That's why I said traditional standards by HBS, because, I long realized that I'm not going to make it by the traditional HBS standards. But no, I'm really pleased with the way things go. And I think a lot of it was just because I was working really hard. I mean, I kept my nose to the ground. And I remember when I was in China, and it was the scariest moment of my life was right after Tiananmen Square. And it was the next morning, and one of the military units had decided to take all of their tanks down the road, and we're living in a foreign compound where there were only diplomats and journalists. And literally, it sounded like for half an hour they just fired machine gun fire at our compound. And I had never been so scared in my life. And the first thing, I did was call my parents, and they said, "You've got to come home right away." And I had to explain to my parents, well,
I can't.
journalists are all coming in on the planes to Beijing. Everybody's leaving. I'm a journalist. I'm in that category. But it was an experience I won't trade. It was amazing. I was really lucky to have had that experience because it is very rare that you get to witness history in the making. And I've had lots of different experiences, as you all have too, that you just cherish. And those are just moments in life that hopefully we can all appreciate when we have them.
But I think it's more about like reframing the question about what's success. And as I said, my definition changed over the years. I'm sure all of us could say that. What does it mean to be successful? There are guys in my section that have made hundreds of millions of dollars with hedge funds and private equity and VC. Are they the most successful? I don't know. Not to me. They might think of themselves as successful financially, but I don't know about holistically. So I think it's just on how you frame the question.
Right.
But it's a great question, and I think all of us, there are multiple sets of standards, and oftentimes we let other people's standards influence what we're thinking, or we try to measure ourselves against that as opposed to defining our own. Samantha.
Yeah, I actually just follow on from Trish because one of the only disappointing things about today and yesterday has been the number of times that we've said women are falling behind because we're not an adequate percentage of Fortune 500 CEOs. That seems to be the big measurement, and it was when I came into HBS. And now I look at that and say, if you handed me one of those jobs, I'd say, no, thank you. I don't want one of those jobs. And I don't know if that's because I'm a woman or not, but I just don't look at that as being success in the framework of how I view success. So maybe one of the questions is, how can HBS help us, fast forward a little bit when we're here, we're typically a little bit younger than we are now, and look at what life brings and maybe help frame that question of what success is in more holistic terms, and so that it's not something that we feel like we have to be renegades and keep telling people, well, we are successful, you just can't measure it in dollar terms. Maybe we don't have to be quite so courageous, or maybe our daughters don't have to be quite so courageous if that is more of the conversation while we're here at HBS.
But like
So,
after you and I were here, Myra started a class. It was like models of success or building a life and building a business in the context of a life. So I think the school did try and kind of create tracks, if you will. When we were here, it was just entrepreneurial management, entrepreneurial finance. But you've done a lot.
I actually am going to call on Angela because she's been through really a lot of this. But the question you ask, partly one of the reasons for convening you now is to get your help on this. But I think Angela can also tell us pretty succinctly what the school has been doing, what progress we've made in, say, the past 10 years, maybe 15.
Yeah, no, I think there's actually been tremendous progress that's been made. And, an interesting piece, I did go to the case discussion yesterday, which was totally enriching to hear the multiple perspectives. But I also went to the case discussion when it was with the students. And the dialogue was really different.
Oh, interesting.
Very, very different, because they had a current perspective.
Yeah, right.
And what I was struck, may have just been in the room that I was in, when, of course, you did the piece of, like, where would you rank it 1 through 5? The group that I was in yesterday was, hovering at 2 at best. When that same piece was posed to the students, they were at 4, right?
But the last 2 years,
Right.
I would give them a 4+. But
Yes.
if you look at it in the context of 50
Right.
years, like I said, my dad was in 63, where the 8 women, used to go to the bathroom in the basement of this building, and it was a janitorial closet.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't even have their own bathroom. Like, that's
But your
bad.
point is a good one, so you look and you think, we all would have had the same issue. There are phrases like FOMO, fear of missing out, the herd mentality. I mean, all the things that we would have experienced that are tell you, I can't miss out on something. I must do what everybody else is doing. So you realize culturally there's that already going on. But we do have to be telling more stories about the ranges of things that people do versus just celebrating what everyone, and not because what people think of as the big leaders. And we could name 25 people that always show up in the same stories. But what do we do to celebrate that?
But the plenary speakers that we've had are all women who are like captains of industry. And I go home last night to my 4 kids and my husband, and I go, wow, there's some women out there that have done a lot of stuff, and I'm kind of changing diapers and, and cleaning up vomit. But, sorry, very efficiently, yeah. So even the choice of speakers that the larger speakers, not so much. The panel discussions, I think, have been more around some different tracks that people have taken. But again, and I don't want to take anything away from those women. It's amazing what they've been able to do, and it's interesting to hear those stories. But I think that kind of all fits in a little bit to you. Still knee-jerk reaction is, oh gosh, but you did make $100 million, or you were the CEO of a Fortune 500. That still feels like the goal.
I think one of the problems is that, it's easy to say, it's a really nice tagline, because I'm in the media, I know, Fortune 500, a CEO, it's so easy and it encapsulates
everything.
Something. We need to find another similar encapsulating phrase that also chooses a different paths, or that just measures a different path, or different paths, multiple paths, and actually encourage people to go on those paths as well. So there's as much enthusiasm for those other paths as there is for that path. And I think it's hard. I mean, I don't have an answer right now. I mean, I think it is hard. Even in social enterprise, it's hard to actually come up with a very nice and neat measure. And they're struggling with that too. But I think that we need a more cooperative society per se, just period. I mean, I just think that, we need to contribute to society to make it better for all of us. I mean, even if you take it from the environmental point of view, I mean, we got to preserve this planet. And there are no measurements that HBS really is, promoting to encourage people to go into the area of environmental preservation or, into social enterprise. I mean, they've done a lot, but, they need to actually elevate it to the similar status as, the CEO of
I want to
500
remind you, this is called Harvard Business School. And it is, I always remember that business is a part of a life, but we are dedicated actually to training leaders for business. So it's not surprising that much of the success that we celebrate is actually around business, even though we know it's only one facet of your life. And I think what we've tried to do in the past 15 years is to recognize we're the guys that are going to help you, the guys and the gals, figure out what to do in business, but we are never going to suggest that that is all there is to life, or that that's the only thing to be celebrated. So,
to add on that, Myra, I mean, there's also the business of environmental, development. There's also the business of social enterprise. I mean, in fact, social enterprises need more business operation concepts and principles to govern them. So it's a huge field, and it's not just, I'm not saying, okay, it has to be a not-for-profit. I'm saying that we need to figure out a way to incorporate business practices in the operation of everything else that we do.
And I do think the Bulletin's done a good job more recently of not just focusing on the Fortune 500 CEOs, even the women's issue. A lot of those women you maybe never heard of before, and they do try and feature the philanthropists, social entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs, and it's not just, if you look at the website and you look at the magazine, I think they have tried to find some of those hidden gems.
I'm going to go to another question. Ling.
Hi guys, thanks for coming. I was wondering if you could share some of your creative, unusual ideas for helping either yourself or your staff to achieve sort of the success that you're describing of having a family, a job, a career. This is one of the things I'm struggling with is I'd love to do that. We put all those ideas on the board, but I'm running out of ideas of creative things to do that you might have done.
Yeah, so I think Angela and Paige might speak to this because both of you have staffs or people that work as contract and how you do it.
Happy to speak to that. And again, one that I'll use as just a foundational point. At a point when my kids were very little, right? And again, I've worked full time the entire time, but there was a part where it was, how can I construct my role in a way where I can't be here all the time, and so, but you also don't necessarily want to cut back where then you're not getting the interesting things to do. So how can you do the interesting things that you want to do while trying to do it on a certain time commitment? And I was working with Kim Clark, the dean at the time, and we kind of worked through how this possibly might work. And so it kind of gave me this part of realizing, you know what, there's a lot that happens in the day that doesn't have to happen at work. I can't, and so then you get really tactical about it. And what I realized then for the staff that we work with here, you can read things at home, you can write things at home. That's like no problem. I mean, I think it becomes, you got to get your job done. So I often try to think about, like, what do we do in terms of allowing people to have flexibility where it just comes down to get your job done, but you don't have to be here all the time. If you've got to get to the soccer game or you've got other sets of things that you need to do, I think that's the kind of culture that you want, that affords that kind of flexibility, which has an expectation. I know Cheryl's going to get it done. How she gets it done, and the fact that it may be that she's 10 p.m. and she's just got to go online because the reality was she left at 3 o'clock to make sure she got to her kids' thing, that's fine. So I think there is a cultural element to it that does get a tactical in allowing things like that. So that's one element of thing, one tactic. Anyway.
For me, it was really different when I was in my corporate chapter versus my startup chapter versus now. In my corporate chapter, at P&G and Coke, they had pretty strict rules, and my staff had to be there 9 to 5 or 8 to 8 or whatever, and there wasn't a lot of flexibility. When I was the chief marketing officer at the 3 startups, I kind of took the best of my corporate America experience and tried to bring it in an executive summary version to these .coms that were like back in the day, pre-internet bubble, where I had people that brought their dogs to work, and it was the whole drama. And I guess in the startup days, I agree with Angela. I think if you've got the right leadership team, the guys I worked for that had started the company were younger than me, and they didn't have families And if I ran my team kind of like my own little entity. And I didn't care, there were staff meetings where I wanted everyone there, but it was not like Marissa Meyer where I said everyone's got to be at work every day. I had people that had homes on the vineyard that liked spending long weekends. And if they wanted to work Friday afternoon and Monday morning from their house at the vineyard so they could beat the traffic, I was totally fine with that because I knew they were wired to the gills and they would respond. I didn't hold staff meetings at those times because I wanted everyone to be physically there. I think the biggest thing that I learned in those startup years was I wanted people to take risks. I wanted them to not be scared to try things. And so my biggest lesson from that chapter of my career was, since I was in charge, I was, the CMO, every month we would have a lunch where I'd bring in, pizza and soda or whatever. And I made people get up and tell me about their most kind of fantastic failure of the month. And we celebrated the things that really screwed up and what did we learn from this? And people got really competitive about it. You thought that was bad. Let me tell you what I did. Oh my God. And I think people felt like it was okay to try stuff that didn't work. And then we might just, from a best practices, say, oh, and by the way, this other thing that we tried was amazing. And that was great. Keep doing stuff, because if we try enough things that fail, we're going to get that one that's like a home run out of the park. And so I think it's kind of back to reframing the question a little bit. It's not really about FaceTime. In my corporate America life, it was all about the FaceTime. You had to be there a lot. But in the more entrepreneurial community and with my own business, certainly, I don't need to see people. I just want to see results. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I mean, if I could just add something on that. So I had 2 different environments. I ran some reporters, some of who were away, out of New York City, and some of who were in New York City. And then on the business side, I had a group of people who were mostly in office. And then one person came to me and she said that she'd like to work Fridays from home. And I thought hard about that because I think it comes down to the person and trust. And I thought, I thought she was a good performer, but I just wasn't sure how much there would be in terms of, productivity. So what I started to do was I actually we had phone calls on that Friday, every Friday in the afternoon. just to make sure that I just want, it's not like I'm Big Brother trying to figure out that, she's at her desk doing her work, but I just, want to make sure that she was thinking about work and what was going on. So then after, a few calls, then I found that she was doing fine. So then, I could just sort of dissipate that practice. But, I mean, that's one of the things you could do if you, it obviously comes down to trust. With the reporters, it's so funny. So, yes, and at the times you needed FaceTime, you had to be there if your job was in the office. As much as we think we can do things remote, it's a FaceTime place as well. So I had some reporters, in the office who I could watch. I was like, right by their desk all the time. And then I had some correspondents, domestic correspondents, who were, God, I had no idea what they were doing. I mean, they set their own time. As long as they made the press conference, they could be writing at night, and they were more productive than the ones who were in the office. And so. Some people just work in different environments better in different ways. So you just have to sort of know or get to know the people who are working for you and whether they will thrive, in a more flexible environment. And, maybe the ones who are in the home office should have been out more.
And you might comment, you work in an industry in which it's sort of a 24/7, and many people think of it as one of the harshest work environments. So maybe you can comment a little bit on what it all, in your own experience, and also what the partnership is doing.
I was trying to think about your situation a little bit younger and maybe not having as much autonomy as you would like as somebody more senior. But at the same time, I think you need to go for it. And hopefully that's some of the themes that are coming out from this discussion. I mean, I would push as hard as you can and then ask for forgiveness later. And when I work with women and men, I mean, I not to stereotype, but the man goes and gets a haircut, or he goes and plays golf or something, and he doesn't tell anybody where he's gone, whereas a woman employee will say, like, could I go to the soccer game? I'm like, you didn't need to tell me, but maybe there's a difference in how they're thinking and feeling guilty about what they're asking for. And so I think it's a mindset that you need to go into. Bain will take as much time as you can give it, but at the same time, at the end of the day, it's about results. And so as long as you can produce something, you should be trying to push as much as you can in terms of what you can get away with, in terms of being in the office, in terms of not being in the office, in terms of getting permission to work the way you want, but just get the results done. So I think that's coming across in all of our discussions, but don't feel like you need to ask first. Just go for it.
Okay, I know I'm missing you guys because I'm right down here. Why don't I start with you and then I'll come back to you.
It sounds like you guys have had really rich lives thus far, and I'm 5 years out of HBS, and I take every decision I make, whether it's personal or professional, like really seriously, right? I'm like, okay, am I making the right decision? Am I not making the right decision? So, is there anything that you guys regret in your long career, or anything you wish you had done differently?
Too many that tons of regrets. I mean, I really. But life's about trade-offs, and you're just constantly making those trade-offs. And so, as long as you can make that good trade at that time, then you just live the best life you can. So, I mean, I just think that it's not realistic to think that you won't have regrets. I mean, the best thing that I can say is that you just have to be aware of the trade-offs that you're making.
So we did this panel yesterday, and we had 2 different panelists on the panel. And one of the panelists who's not here today said she made her career decisions one decision at a time. And I think, one of the things you learn at HBS is having to make decisions with uncertainty. And you just do the best you can and know that you're going to course correct. If you screwed up, you'll figure out another plan on the next step. So I thought that was really good advice. And a thing that I mentioned yesterday, which a lot of people came up to me after, and Angela actually mentioned it as well, is I think you look at us, our bios are in the book, and we're experts because we're here speaking to you now. And I think, the resume and bio that you see in the book is like the A side of our resume. It's the perfect version. And all of us have a B side too. And we could tell you about the times we were fired, where we were laid off, we got into a huge argument, and things completely blew up. And all of us have those warts and pimples. You just don't showcase it in the bio book. So just know that, like, when I come and speak to students on campus now, they're like, you've never failed. How did you get so lucky? And it's like, it's not luck. I've worked my ass off for 20 plus years. And I screw up all the time, like literally all the time. But the thing that's kept me going is you do have to have the courage to just say, when an opportunity presents itself, raise your hand and say, yeah, okay, I'll try that. Or, yeah, I can lead that group. I mean, I've been promoted into jobs that I had no business doing at all. But you figure it out. I mean, you were smart enough to get in here, so you're gonna do okay, and you're probably gonna do a lot better than most of the people. And the guys are gonna raise their hand every time, whether they're qualified or not, honestly. And that was my one takeaway at business school. Someone would make a comment, and I'd be like too scared because I didn't think I'd done enough work on the case the night before. And someone would make a comment, some guy, and I'd be like, well, duh, like I could have said that. And I'm like, all right, so raise your hand and get in the conversation, because if you don't say it, someone else will, and you'll get credit that day for speaking in class. So just get out of your own way, raise your hand, take the risk. One of the women that's not here from yesterday said every job she took in her career, and she was like incredibly successful, 50% of the jobs she knew really well, and 50% of the jobs she had no clue about. And she figured, I knew enough to impress them on the half that I knew that I could figure out the other half along the way. Again, I think that's probably, all of us can probably give you examples of that too. I mean, I got promoted into jobs where I'm like, well, gee, I've never actually done that before, but I'll find someone that can give me some good advice, and if I screw up, I'll fix it next time. So don't overthink it.
One comment on that too, which, because I know, I suffer from this problem, you may suffer from the same thing, is thinking that you need to have everything planned and known and understood. And so what I've come to realize is, like, the best things that have happened is when I didn't sweat the job description, I wasn't worrying about the title, what was the compensation going to be, what were the, it just, because I think we fall into this place where we've led wonderfully, in some respects, linear lives, where, okay, now this is going to lead to this, and it's going to lead to this, and what's the description, what's the path, and it really, honestly, we're a couple of faculty members, and Myra included on this, who just were like, moments just like, jump off the limb. I know you know nothing about the topic that they're asking you to get involved in. I know nothing about construction. But you just realize, okay, and if I sweat the details too much, and it turned out okay. It turned out okay. Yes. Thank you. But those are the kind of things of like, don't be your own worst enemy, like overthinking, over planning, over positioning.
Like in retrospect, I can connect the dots to my so-called career and tell you a great story. But at the time, it didn't really make sense looking forward. It only really makes sense when you're looking back and you go, oh, well, of course, I started in brand management at Procter & Gamble, which led to I can tell a great story, but, I've got the perspective now to do that. I didn't really know what I was getting into with each one of those moves, but it makes sense now.
So I'm going to come to you in a minute, but I promised I would get to you next.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, to the point about defining success, Cheryl, I've been inspired by you, like your career since Tiananmen, and then I saw you on the Oprah show, then I read Half the Sky, then I made my entire group at my company that I previously worked at read Half the Sky. And I just think it's so funny because I actually did not know until this weekend that you went to HBS. All of that. So I heard that a lot. But the point to defining success, I'm like, she's just like me. But I was curious because the women in Half the Sky, I mean, their lives are so different, obviously, from this conversation, and they're so inspiring as to what they could achieve from where they come from all over the world. And I think about this whole week and what we've been talking about. Can I get out of work to go to a soccer game? All of the things that we're really struggling with, and then you read about these stories, and you're like, okay, now they're really, really struggling. Like, do those women look at this kind of American conversation and think we're, like, in some sort of position of luxury where the spoils are like these fine, changes that we're trying to adjust for? Right. Or are we supposed to make some certain changes here that ultimately open doors for women everywhere? I really struggle with that when we have these conversations because it feels so American. It feels so lucky. And then, Half the Sky is full of amazing stories of women who have 1% of all these resources.
No, that's Steph, right? Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for your really nice words. One thing that's really important is that it does give you perspective. And funny enough, people think, oh my God, these are just horrible stories, but when you go there, you see stories side by side with all the horror. You see the most creative solutions. I mean, like, my gosh, if I were in that position, could I have come up with those creative solutions? So surprisingly enough, when you tour the world, you see other parts of the world, you'll come up with creative solutions to your own life. And so it really is expansionary rather than just sort of restrictive. And I think that sometimes we do forget that when it's a real privilege to be able to have these struggles. But when you go around, you'll come back and you'll see it's not just that you'll maybe have a solution out there that you can apply to your particular situation, but you'll be thinking in different ways, and you'll come up with solutions that will surprise you. So I do think that it gives you perspective a lot, and the people out there have no clue what we do here, so I don't think they. So, but they have very similar struggles about their kids. Their mothers out there too. They're dealing with different problems. I mean, it's like, they don't get health care, but, access to health care, we all deal with access to health care. Keeping their kids in school, how to, manage, they have to, lug water 8 hours a day, but then they got to take care of the kids. So they're dealing with similar things. But
it's not just a first world, third world problem. I mean, look at all the people in this country who have spent the last decade in Afghanistan and Iraq. And, when you're complaining like, God, it's really cold today, or, gee, that airline stewardess was such a jerk to me. Like there are people that have really tough problems that are like doing jobs that you and I really wouldn't want to do every day. And they live in this country, and you don't have to look at third world poverty and be like, God, these people really have struggles. There are a lot of people in this country that have struggles, and we do have high class problems, no question. But yeah, it just raises the bar for you to really make meaning in your own life and try and raise the bar for everyone else so that you can create jobs or make your little corner of your community better so that more people benefit from that.
Laurel, you were on deck.
Yeah, well, I have a little bit of a different question. It's more on, I guess, a creative solution to work-life balance a little bit. And Anne, you spoke a little about how you work 2 days a week now and have a couple months off in the summer. And I'm sure that the rest of you have probably dealt with people that have maybe wanted to have more flexible work situations. And I've worked for startups, and now I work for a larger software company and an older software company. So it's kind of, a little bit more corporate, I guess. And I'm always curious how you can ever get to the point where instead of working 60 hours a week, I want to take Fridays off all the time. Or, how do you negotiate something a little bit more flexible? I have a 4-year-old at home. I realize now evidently the life expectancy, somebody said in one of these sessions, is 82, so I've got plenty of time. But I do want to spend a little time with my daughter because she's only going to be in my house for so long. And so I think about that. I don't want to leave the workforce. I don't want to just go and work maybe 2 days a week, but how do I stay continuing to do the job that I do, and I think I do well, but maybe not negotiate against myself when I'm talking to my employer about, I don't want to be paid less. I want to work less. There's some, I'm just curious if you have any advice of people you've dealt with that, or the experience you had in changing your work.
As Myra said, it's Bain is one of the toughest. We're all in a client service industry, and at the end of the day, there's tons of travel and so on. I think it's probably a model that is a little bit more advanced than what you're seeing in your organization, because in order to keep women, there's been so many different computations. You want to work 25%, you want to telecommute, you want to work 9 months and then 3 months off and so on. But it sounds as if as your organization grows larger, there's also opportunities to start talking about flexible models and different ways of working, whether it's bringing more work at home, whether it's working one day out of the office and so on. But being able to, as a company grows and so on, and they want to keep the talented women and that pool of people who want the flexibility, there needs to be some kind of engagement with HR and so on to create those. And so you may unfortunately have to be the pioneer in your organization to start that. But I think there's more and more corporates who go down in very creative ways and find solutions to flexible work hours.
And we have a lot of, it's very flexible. It's just, I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, even if I say I'm gonna work 4 days a week going forward, am I really gonna be on my, my mobile device all day on the fifth day? Or, it's a very flexible work environment. It's just, I'm thinking about how do you even negotiate, hey, I only wanna work 4 days a week.
Yeah, in one case, I'm always cognizant of it's often not even just about work family, right? There are people who have amazing hobbies, right? Great flutist, they need the time for X, Y, Z. Preparing for the Pan Mass Challenge, they need time for such and such. Ailing parents, brothers or sisters who need help, right? There's all kinds of sets of things. I think we can get into the work, family, thinking a children piece, but look, we all have life chapters, right? We're many different things from hobbies to whatever. What I often find is to say, okay, Laurel, tell me what it is you can, what do you want? What do you need? But construct it in a way that I can be reassured that this is going to work out, whether how you would handle coverage, that nothing's going to slip between. But rather than putting it on the onus on the individual you're working for to say, come up with a plan for me, for my situation. I'll come through. No, why don't you come up with a plan that then I can actually realize, okay, yeah, great. Laurel can't be here on Friday, but she's always back on Monday. She's checking her email at a certain point. She's going to, so I find that has to be a little bit of that two-way street of totally open for these life chapters, what you need to do. Just help me to know what the plan is from your point of view so that I know as the employer, that things aren't going to slip between the cracks.
And I
so
think
that's
people
something to think about.
Think of it as like a career ladder, like there's one path to get promoted, but it's not really a ladder. It's more like a lattice. Like you might take a lateral move or you might carve out a special project that you do for 6 months because for the next 6 months you don't want to travel as much or whatever, and you figure out some project that you go, you know what, I'll do that. And it might be something that's like sidestepping the ladder, but ultimately you're going to get great skills, you're going to build a bigger network. So I just think of it more broadly and not just linear.
That's a great plug for a book by one of our alumni. Kathy Benko wrote the book about the corporate lattice that is in place. It's really, she was heading up the talent management at Deloitte, which is a firm that has spent the past 25 years trying to figure out how to keep great talent and still have the people satisfied with the way their life works in their workplace. So it gives many creative answers on how other companies, in this case Deloitte, have really addressed the issue. And honestly, whenever a company calls me to consult on it, I say, well, why do you have to start at ground zero? There are particular institutions, Bain's another one, McKinsey's doing it, many places are doing it, where you can get the information and jumpstart. So you don't have to do the first 10 years. You can just get on the train and start working, but it also would help in yours. We could talk a little bit longer. I know Cheryl's going to be in Burden at 11 o'clock, and theoretically, I think we're supposed to stop at 10:30. But I'd like to ask, I see that you have okay. Last question, then I'm going to ask each panelist to give us like her last word of wisdom of what she hopes you will take away from this that'll somehow change your thinking about your brilliant career.
And Myra, Hart, can you also say a little bit share some advice too? I mean, you have had a pretty brilliant career. Thank
you. I'll tell you what, we'll have the question. I'll be one of the wrap-ups. Okay.
Quickly, and I guess the tactics for which you create this flexible work arrangement is interesting, and the lattice and all of that, but I'm less interested in the tactics about creating that. I was a consultant at McKinsey for a number of years after business school and ended up with this whole lattice, not being compelling in terms of the lateral moves. And what you said earlier and really struck in terms of sometimes you feel irrelevant. And I feel like the deeper, not the actual tactics of figuring out how does it work, but how do you end up creating that path where you don't feel like you go the irrelevant path and that you're able to make the successful career, again, not to Samantha's point, as a Fortune 500 person, and not as an irrelevant, like McKinsey was crafting this fabulous role for me, but it was an internal staff position, which I didn't feel like was a front line kind of impactful. So how have you dealt with that?
So, in the parallel life, after 2007, I was told I wouldn't get to director. I could try again next year. I'd be a director today, and I'd be on the comp committee or the management committee, And that would have been very, very fulfilling, and it may be a good capstone for a Bain career. I have to be comfortable, and I'm 45 now. I waited a really long time for my family. I have a great husband. I need to be comfortable. I took myself off that path. And I like hearing what Sonia is saying and our responses. We all think we have a path, and we have to be comfortable at the end that there's so many other aspects of our life. So I love my job. I feel very fulfilled. I recognize it's not that important to 99% of the people at Bain, but it's important to me. And I couldn't have said that when I was 25, but you know, I've worked my whole life, and I feel like, wow, I've accomplished so much of what I wanted. I could have kept going a certain way, but by taking myself off, it was such a blessing to be able to do something I want and also have a very fulfilling family life. It's hard, definitely hard, but I think all of us have great choices ahead of us. You could have stayed at McKinsey on the front line. I totally understand that the staff wasn't what you wanted, and so you made a choice at that time, which is great, but it's all something at the end of the day. We're our worst critics, our worst enemies. We're the ones that are harshest in looking at what we think we should be versus what we ended up being. And I love what I ended up being, and we should all feel good about the choices that led us to that.
Thank you, Anne. I'm going to take just boom, 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 just like 1 minute or less, your kind of takeaway for the day.
So I guess I would just say, figure out what you love doing and create a life around stuff you are really psyched about, because you can, you know, we're all pretty smart. We got into this place. You can, like I said, I kind of created a platform to do stuff I like. Even if you're not entrepreneurial in nature, you can be entrepreneurial in an organization. It's an attitude to create relevancy for yourself. Like, what are you psyched about? What do you jump out of bed every day thinking, God, I want to think about that. Become a thought leader in that. Create opportunities in that area, and you'll always be relevant. I mean, I don't feel like I'm irrelevant just because I left my big corporate marketing job, or I'm no longer, you know, CMO of a great hot startup. I think I'm in many ways more relevant now than I ever was then, because then you get hit by a bus and someone's in your chair in 10 minutes, they'd have somebody promoted. Now, what I've created, it's like a reflection of me. And that's cool. That gets me out of bed every day. Like, all right, what do I want to do today? What do I want to make happen? And I make it happen. So you can do that. You know, everyone in here can do that.
You know, I'd say that when you take the measure of your life, I think that you should take a very wide perspective. One of the biggest regrets that Bill Gates said that he had was, while he had a fabulous career, he didn't start early enough, just learning about how the other half lives, you know, just about other worlds and other perspectives. And that can really add a lot of meaning to your life as well. And so I hope that when you do think about what really matters to you in life, career is very important, family is very important, but also just what you think you can do to, you know, contribute to society, to, you know, as they say, you know, leave it better off than when you entered it. So I think it's important to think about that.
I guess my quick one would be to actually enjoy thinking about your life in chapters. And I mentioned that before about chapters. But I know what I needed when my kids were babies was very different than when they were in elementary school, is different now than they were in high school, is different when my parents were dying, right? There are all these life chapters. And so when I got out of that frame of worrying about the next 10 years and thought, what's the next 3 years? It became liberating. Like, what's the next 3 years? I got a long life, right? We are going to live till 82. I got a long life. I got a long professional run. But what are those in those chapters? So I would really honestly think about that. We think about corporate plans, and put your life into that same thing of those chapter moments and what do you need then. And then one last one, Heidi, I'm going to actually answer because Myra offered me this tremendous advice. I'm sure she's got her own. Never underestimate the importance of geography. And by geography, where do you want to live? You know, what kind of community of support do you need to have around you? So for me, that choice became being near my family, which meant my parents could participate in the raising of my children while I worked, my brother could, and the aunts and uncles, you know, it had a little bit of that village aspect to it, but that was right for our family. It's not right for us. But that piece of geography often does not enter the dialogue about when you're thinking about that choice. What kind of sphere do you want to have around you? So anyway, that was a pearl from Myra that forever stuck with me.
Don't underestimate geography, but also don't close off the opportunity for serendipity. My husband and I met in California. We always wanted to settle in California, and jobs brought us to Boston, and it's been awesome. And if you would have said to me, you're going to buy a house and plant roots on the East Coast, I would have thought you were crazy. But be open to the serendipity in your life and your career, because sometimes, even if you have an idea of geography, life can bring you in different places, and that can be incredibly fulfilling as well.
One comment that struck me as we speak to some of the younger MBA graduates is find mentorship. You know, find somebody that makes your job fun to talk to learn from. A lot of these, you know, concerns or life goals and so on, somebody you can share them with, whether it's in your organization or a little bit outside, but being able to have that outlet of, you know, being able to talk about, you know, personal things is really important to help keep you strong at work.
I would say, and you asked, so I'm loving this, but that always live in the moment. Make choices that make you happy now, not something that you think will make you happy in 5 years. Like Ann Moore, I chose an industry that was completely unpopular and everyone thought I was insane when I went in the supermarket business. I totally loved it. And as a result, I did super well. If I hated it, I wouldn't have done well. And it provided me the introductions to people who shared that. And the rest of my career was just serendipity from meeting people that shared the same interests and made it happen. I also didn't suffer from this not feeling successful. I almost always felt successful, not necessarily at the end of a day, but at the end of a year. So there's a lot of downtime and a lot of this B-side, but in the end, because I was doing what I loved, I always felt successful and I always felt like I could do more. And I so emphasize doing what's important to you and not what the person on your left or your right says is going to make you happy or make you successful, but what you say, hey, I just love doing it. So I hope you have loved the first day and a half, and there's something really big for you next. And don't forget the lunch with the MBA students after Sheryl's talk. Thank you so much.